Suicides as a whole, 80% are men, and that's both in America and in Europe, correct?
Yeah, so male suicides outstrip female suicides in every country in the world. In America, yeah, it's about 80%. UK, maybe 75%. In some countries, it's like 90%, especially in Eastern Europe. And
90%.
and it's been more men killing themselves than women for the past 100 years. So as long as we've had the data.
Hey, how you doing? Welcome back to the Another Nobody Show with me, your favorite nobody, Travis Myers. Today we'll be talking with George of The Tinmen. George presents unapologetic, fact-based evidence on behalf of men, men's health and well-being, and in particular, suicide prevention, which is exactly what we're going to be discussing today. Male suicide, its rise over the last few decades, and maybe some possible solutions. Please do listen. It's an important issue as we all have a man and or boy in our lives. Nah, that's enough for me. Let's get with George. Hey everybody, how you doing? Today I have George from the Tin Men. And he is an expert, as I just described, in, you know, I hate to call it this, but it's what I'm going to call it because it is the current vernacular. And I'm pretty sure you don't care for it either, George. The manosphere, right? Um,
Manosphere.
and and really how quite often, well, today, unfortunately, we're going to talk about male suicide. All right. But quite often how there has been, I want to say, I guess, how men are somehow overlooked with so many mental and social problems. Correct?
Yeah. I mean, that's fair. I mean, ultimately trying to help men live longer, happier, healthier lives. Call
Yes.
it what you want. Some people call it the manosphere. I often
Yes.
find that's used to scare people away from these conversations, which needn't be so scary. But ultimately, it's all about men's health and male suicide prevention. Now, we talked about offline, but
Yes.
suicide is the biggest risk in my life. So, how better to spend my time than to try to bring that number down? And obviously, not just my life, but all young men's lives. It's the biggest risk every single day. So, it's a massive problem. Not enough people talking about it, but trying my best. And yeah, I'm George.
That's why you're here today to help enlighten us all. Because when I discovered you, I don't know, only a couple of months ago when I very first discovered you, and I found you on Instagram,
Mm,
and for whatever reason it was something that popped up, and I listened to what you had to say, and the things that really kind of shocked me, and again, as a 60-year-old man, ex-military guy, new NYPD detective, you think I'm a guy that's seen it all, supposedly, right? But I was shocked that 80% of suicides are men.
mm.
Suicides as a whole, 80% are men, and that's both in America and in Europe, correct?
Yeah, so male suicides outstrip female suicides in every country in the world. In America, yeah, it's about 80%. UK, maybe 75%. In some countries, it's like 90%, especially in Eastern Europe. And
90%.
and it's been more men killing themselves than women for the past 100 years. So as long as we've had the data, men have been killing themselves and their lives in numbers far greater than women. So it's a global problem, although it's different in different areas. Maybe we can talk about that. But yep, quite literally the biggest risk to my life. And it's not even, people always try to frame it as like a young men's problem. And in many ways it is, but it's often older men too. Like the biggest disparity in suicide rates is between men over 85. And the suicide rate for men over 85 is 1,500% times higher than women. So you're 15 times more likely to die by suicide if you're a man over 85. A
Wow.
lot, yeah. So that is really shocking. I had to double check that. That's American data. So I
Well,
think
that's
that,
what I had not to interrupt you. What did I read? Rates per 100,000. This is for our listeners. I'll read this out.
Mhm.
But rates per 100,000 in the United States, and if these numbers are correct and current, from the ages of 10 to 14 is 3, which is great. That's fairly low, right? 15 to 24, it jumps to 22 per 100,000. 25 to 44, it jumps again to 30. 45 to 64, it goes to 28.
Mm.
65 to 74, it drops a little bit to 26.
Mm.
Then 75 plus, it's 42,
Mm.
which is a very big jump.
But it's not just. I mean, I know we want to talk about suicide on this podcast, but in all the causes of death, and again, in America, if I were to write down all top 15 causes of death, of which only one is suicide, men lead in 13 of those causes. So,
Oh, sure,
in pretty
sure.
much every single way in which you could die, men die more than women in America. I think it's something like men lose 4.1 million years of life collectively in America every single year, which is 3 times more than women. You're more likely to die at every age. You have worse health in every single socioeconomic, racial, ethnic group. I think men die at 1.4, 1.5 times the rate as women.
Yeah.
So these are
Well,
all new stats to you that I'm sure most of your listeners don't know about. So that's why I'm trying to just raise a flag, not just for suicide, but for men's health more generally.
Well, what I really like about what you do and what the things that you've made me think of is if you had asked me, a year ago before I ever heard of George and the Tin Men, all right, I would have said, yeah, of course men die more. We have more dangerous jobs. We tend just to take more risks, you know. We drive more, we drink more, we do more drugs. We can go on and on and on with the things that men do that they should not do and or that we have to do because women simply don't do them. 95, 97% of construction workers are men, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a very hazardous job. Jobs that people don't even think of, like track workers, and they never make the news in New York City. Guys that work in the subways, they get killed all the time.
Mm.
Again, it's like 98% men, you
Mm.
know? So I would expect those numbers to be higher. But when it comes to the intentional suicide, you know, that is really shocking to me that men are intentionally taking their lives. And again, I would have said yes to men, but I would have thought it would have been more like a 60-40 thing,
Mm.
not an 80% as a whole. And you
Mm.
say in some countries it's even higher.
Yeah, I'm always shocked that people don't know that. That's kind of shocking too. That it's like two levels of being sort of shocked for me. It's the first is the issue itself, and then the second is how few people know about it. I mean, I spend every day working in this area, so it's not news to me. But it's amazing how male suicide isn't the headline news on every single paper in America right now because it's just so horrific. Not just obviously America, but in the UK, everywhere. Interesting, you brought up workplace death. It's another really important one. But I think it's about 90 to 95% of all workplace deaths in America are men. And the
Yes.
numbers are astronomical. You won't believe it. Like you talked about being a veteran. That one of the things I found is that there are more male deaths at work in just the last year than there have been in 20 years of military deaths in Iraq. So all of
Yes.
the American military deaths, 20 years, there are
Yes.
more deaths at work every year. So more just annually, and that's happening every year, every year, every year, every year. It's about 4.5 to 5,000 male deaths at work. Most of them avoidable, and like you said, never hear about it. Never hear about it at all. Men are doing
No.
all the dangerous jobs. They're paying with it quite literally with their lives. Never makes the news.
Yeah, quite often it's a side note, if not even almost a joke,
Mm.
when you're talking about a great bridge that was built, or this giant, and the Empire State Building, or something iconic like that. Okay, and they'll say yes, and 8 men lost their lives building this, or 15 men lost their lives. There's men buried in the cement. They'll tell you all these stories, but again, it's almost as a God, I don't want to say funny, but uh, a side note and a funny anecdote about the building of it and how dramatic they're trying to make the structure more dramatic, when
Mm.
in real life that happens every day.
Mm.
You got these iron workers in New York City. One wrong step, you're done, my friend. You know, Electricians shocking themselves to death. You know, uh, we have them. I don't know what you would call them in England, but sandhogs. They dig the tunnels incredibly dangerous, incredibly dangerous work. Not only does nobody hear about it, nobody cares.
Mm.
Really, nobody cares, and that's got to be a big part of it too. Is just I would imagine the despair and then well, if I give like you know personal anecdotes or whatever things I know, I work construction. I worked as a construction worker before I became a police officer, and my God, is it a tough job. You get up first thing in the morning, you ride the subway to work as I did, which sucked, and then like all New Yorkers do, and then you break your ass for 8 hours, and you come home, and you got to go to sleep at like 8 o'clock at night because you got to get up again the next morning to do it all over again. And it certainly was not a life for me, and that's why I joined the police department to get the hell out of
Well, nor me. I mean, I couldn't do that job. I'm not cut out for that at all. And that's one of the many reasons why men are paid more than women. And quite rightly so. Like, if you're going to risk your life going to work, you should be paid more. If you're going to break your back, work your like hands down to the nail, like you should be paid more. And they are. And that's one of the reasons. It's not just America either. I mean, all over the world, men do these jobs. I mean, we had the World Cup in Qatar not long ago, and 6,500 men died to build those stadiums. 6,500 men,
5,000.
just to build the stadiums in Qatar. Maybe even more. We don't really know. That's probably quite a low estimate. So
Wow.
everyone keeps taking the knee in after Black Lives Matter to remember George Floyd, and that's fine. But no one ever took the knee for the 6,500 men that died to build those stadiums. I think I worked it out. I worked it out that if you took a knee for every minute for every man that died to build those stadiums, you'd be kneeling for about 70 games consecutively. That's how many deaths we're talking about worldwide in things like fishing. I think fishing is the most dangerous industry in the world. 100,000 deaths worldwide, mostly men, almost entirely men. 100,000. That is just like this. Think about the biggest stadium you could put. I don't know how big Yankee Stadium is. Not 100,000. Think about that. Dead every year, men. That's just fishing.
And again, something that nobody thinks about. They did have a television show with the deadliest catch. I don't know if you had that in England. It was an
Yeah.
American, and they would show these guys go out and just how ridiculous it was. But even then, when you sit down at Red Lobster, which we have in America, a giant seafood chain,
Mm,
or whatever your local restaurant is, to have a nice piece of cod, you don't think about that. Not for a
mm,
second. You think
no.
about the poor guys who are getting washed overboard, dying of hypothermia, getting hit with things, whatever happens to them. It's really tough, tough work.
Yeah, I mean, it blew my mind. I think in Nigeria, the fishing industry there is horrendous. I think 1 in 10 fishers dies every year, 10% mortality rate. You just can't get your head around that sort of cost. And it's not fishing, it's mining, it's driving, it's construction, as you pointed out, it's everything. Heavy industry, factory work, not just deaths, but men who are maimed and killed.
Yeah.
War obviously comes at a huge cost. I've always been shocked that how many more men die by suicide than people lost in war. I think you're several times more likely to kill yourself than to die in war after the war. So the real war is that the one at home, where whenever veterans come home, the government doesn't seem to give a shit. They'll just throw them to the street corner, often literally. And addiction, suicide, abuse, homelessness, drug use, prison, like these are all things that overwhelmingly impact men, especially working men. No one seems to give a shit. Uh, so it's like, yeah, but I guess the common denominator people talk about is this thing called male disposability, which is
Mhm.
hopefully the new word of the day for you, which is really summarizes everything we're talking about, how a man's life is disposable, be it fishing or at war or wherever else. Male disposability.
But how much of it now do you think? Well, I'm going to back that up. Before I ask that, I also in my research uh, found that it has begun to grow. I don't want to say it maybe if exponentially is quite the right word, but it's grown quite a bit since the year 2000. Okay, it seems to, though I want to say popular, that suicide has become more popular since amongst men since the year 2000. Do you think that a lot of that has to do, back again, like we were making fun of the word manosphere a minute ago, with this, this toxic masculinity thing, this nonsense where um, people are almost, They're angry at men.
Mm.
You know, the world is angry at men are now angry at men. You know, and quite often when I say this, these are more men in the media than men who are actually doing the work because we tend to understand one another. We know our world. We know where we're coming from. It's not the guys down at the corner pub who are uh, uh, trashing men, but society as a whole seems to be for, a good 25 years now, according to what I've read.
Yeah, and from an earlier and earlier stage, I think about a quarter of boys in the UK where I live, and we're talking about 12-year-olds here, a quarter of them have been introduced to the idea that men are a problem to society. So it's
Yeah.
not just you and I, who to an extent we can shrug off these nonsense concepts of toxic masculinity as just cartoonish worldviews. But when you're telling young children, specifically boys, men are toxic, men are problematic, you're basically a rapist in waiting, that is even more harmful, I think, and it's growing. It's more and more and more. I think that certainly contributes to the problem, like the whole misandry, you call it, which is the opposite of misogyny, where it's basically a hatred or dislike of men. That is on the rise. I don't think that explains the entire disparity of male suicide, but it must be playing a part in it. I mean, male suicide is a very complicated. I mean, all suicide, but male suicide in this case is a really complicated phenomenon. It's often many different things intersecting together. It's never just one thing, but one of those things is surely just a dislike and disdain of men publicly. Like, it's not even something to be ashamed of. Like, there's no other group that you could openly call toxic and get away with it apart from men. So that's definitely the language and the approach and
That's
lack of empathy is a big problem.
that's kind of what I was getting at with is it becoming more of a generational thing? And again, although we know older people are killing themselves more, but the dislike, distrust, whatever we want to say about men. I mean, I know for myself, all right, as a young boy, um, well, we can talk about like television. I mean, for the last 25, 30 years, every father figure on television is portrayed as a moron. He's
Mm.
an idiot. And the wife is the smart one. The husband is the buffoon. That was not when I was a kid, we did have other shows, in the 60s and even in the 70s, right into the 80s, where the father was the hero figure.
Yeah,
You know?
Uncle Phil from Fresh Prince of Bel Air. What an amazing father figure.
Sure. Well, we had too, as a young man looking up to actors, as we all do. Where is to make it simple, where is the John Wayne of today? You know,
Long gone, I'm afraid. You're right.
exactly. A man who was a man, but a good man. If you watch those old John Wayne movies, it wasn't that he was this. He may have been an alpha male, but he wasn't this hyper masculine, evil guy by any means. He had a heart. He stuck his neck out for everybody. He saved women and children. You
Mm.
know, he did the right thing in almost every film. Very rarely was John Wayne a bad guy. And even if he was a bad guy, he was the bad guy with a heart of gold. You know what I'm saying? But now it seems that, again, not only are men always the bad guy, but the superhero in the film turns out to be a woman.
Yeah. I mean, I always want to see female villains. If we're talking about powerful women, there's nothing more powerful than being a villain, and we never see women as villains. So that's normally men, often white men. That role is completely typecast to white men.
Yes, yes.
Uh, yeah, but you're right to look at TV, especially TV sitcom dads. You just name top of your head, like you got Homer Simpson, you got Peter Griffin, you've got Hal, like really deadbeat, doofus, inept father figures, clowns, oafs that are obviously great comedy characters, but don't represent fatherhood particularly well. Whereas you've swapped out people like Uncle Phil, you've swapped out Mr. Rogers, John Wayne, etc., as these really strong fatherly figures.
I mean, going way back, you had the TV show Fathers Knows Best,
Mm,
or My Three Sons,
mm,
or even the Brady Bunch. The,
mm.
the father was, it's a garbage show. It's a shit television show. However, the father was the father, and he took care of. Not only did he take care of his three sons, he took care of his new wife and his new stepdaughters. With humility, with grace, with strength. He was a good man. You know,
Yeah.
and
Well,
and
it's,
you see, it's no longer fashionable for
no.
for men to be, shall I say, for men to be men? I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say, but it's also just not just on TV. Like literally at home. I think about a quarter of all boys in America have no father at home now. There's
Yes.
a lot of fatherlessness. A lot of boys going without any male role model, not just on TV but at home.
I'm, I'm happy that you brought this up because I don't have it on my list of things to ask you. So let me throw this out real quick since you did bring it out. Um, are you familiar with Patrick Moynihan?
No, no.
Patrick Moynihan was an American politician. He was from Queens, New York. I believe he was from Queens. I might be wrong. But back in the 60s, he had written, he was a Democrat, okay? And he had written a paper or a article, if you will. And it had to do with 25% of Black Americans or Black American homes were fatherless, and something like 5% of white American homes were fatherless. And you wanted to make the correlation of how important the father was to the family structure, especially for the black family. Okay. He was lambasted for that because although he was a Democrat, they considered it to be a racist thing to disparage black people as having more fatherless homes, although it happened to be a fact. Now, today in America, I don't know how it is in England, but I'm sure you're kind of like
Not far behind.
our little brother. We're very, very similar.
Yeah.
And we do. We mirror each other very much in a lot of respects. But now here in America, 70 to 73% of black homes are fatherless. White homes are now up to 25%. So we can see since the 60s when I was born, okay, to today, fatherhood is almost a thing of the past.
Mm,
It really is. And I know myself, being a father, being a family guy, I have a great wife. I have you know, I don't want to say we we were accused once by a friend of kicking it old school, because I'm the husband, she's the wife, and we raised two beautiful kids, and we did everything we could do to have a proper family, as many people do. But it is becoming almost a rare thing.
yeah. No, I mean,
And I can't imagine how difficult it is to be a single mom, okay, and to have raised children themselves. But it's always a single mom. The
mm,
father does not win in court.
no. Well, it's obviously a very
Yes.
complicated issue we can dissect as well. But again, I want to widen it even further. It's a TV lack of TV dads. It's a lack of literal dads at home.
Yes.
And then if obviously when children aren't at home, they're at school. And then who do you think are in classrooms? It's women. I think about 20% of teachers in America are men. So very few.
I bet it's
Yeah, yeah. Well, you got about a quarter of all boys with no dad at home. 80% of them have no male role model at school. So that's maybe 1 in 5 all boys, no male role model at all anywhere at school or at home. I think, and then obviously the younger and younger it goes, the fewer and fewer men are in caring professions, teaching professions. I know in kindergarten, uh, there are now twice as many women flying US jets in the military as a share of the occupation than there are men teaching in kindergarten. That's how few men there are in
oh,
that level. There's like hardly any. It's virtually none. And think
that
about
is a crazy number right there.
yeah,
Crazy number to think that there are more female military pilots
mhm.
than there are kindergarten teachers.
For male ones as a
Yes,
percentage, yeah,
that is wild to me.
twice as many.
Yeah.
So that's how big it's gotten, how bad the problem is, and and then once you found those boys that have no men at school, no men at home, awful role models on TV, you look at how overrepresented suicides are, poor health, homelessness, poverty, drug addiction, incarceration. They're all disproportionately coming from this group of fatherless children, like gangs. Like we have a gang problem in London, obviously New York does too. Most of those boys in gangs are coming from homes without dads. That's not a coincidence, and gangs know that. They recruit, they look for these boys without leadership at home who are looking for a sense of belonging elsewhere, and they'll bring him to a gang because that's ultimately what gang is. It's like a fake family. It's like a
Well,
pseudo family. So if the boy's not going to find it at home, they're going to go looking for it elsewhere on the streets.
something that I can attest to, again, from being a police officer and a detective in the Bronx, which is, I think most of the world knows, is a fairly high crime area.
Yeah.
How many young men I would arrest, teenagers and, guys in their 20s, and, you do their pedigree, you talk to them, you get to know these guys, because you spend hours with them when you arrest them. Um, Quite often, not only did they come from fatherless homes, they didn't even know who their fathers were.
Mm,
I mean, myself, my father left when I was 11, but I had a father until I was 11. And to this day, I know who he was. You know what I'm saying?
mm,
Where, can you imagine? I mean, thinking that well, you grew up your whole life thinking your father and or your mother, neither one of them gave a shit enough about you to even let you know who your father was.
mm.
It's a mystery. And that's just heartbreaking. It's absolutely heartbreaking.
But there's a really interesting study of New York, particularly murder, as you'll know better than anyone as a detective and someone and a New Yorker. Violent crime in New York was going up and up and up in the 90s. I think it was called
Yes,
Fear City. It was called. It was that bad. You
that
had
was my time. That's when I
Yeah,
worked.
yeah. You had like Joe Biden saying rivers of blood in the streets, blah blah blah, and then suddenly it just came down again. Like it just dropped. Like it in the early noughties, it came right down, and then right. And I think in New York, it's like it must be historic lows in violent crime. Certainly a lot lower than the 90s.
Unfortunately, it's rising, and we're going to go into a whole political angle here now. Um, in my opinion, and the numbers back it up, we can all put that to political will. I always like to say political will is the answer to so many of our problems that we have in all of our countries. And the fall of crime in New York City is, not that there was one man responsible, but the guy in charge responsible was Mayor Rudy Giuliani. At my time, when I was hired under the Dinkins administration, he was the mayor at the time. Uh, Homicides rose to over 2,400 a year in New York City. Now they had gone up every single year. 1969 was the first year that it hit a thousand homicides. By the time we got to whatever it was, 94, I think it was 2,400, five, 2,465 or something like that. My numbers are definitely going to be wrong. Okay. Within like 2 years, he had brought that number down below 600. Okay. And that was Giuliani along with his police commissioner, Bill Bratton. All right. Because they had the political will to do it. They say, no more. We're not doing this anymore. Bad guys are getting locked up. We're not going to, we're big initiative, get drugs off the street, get guns off the street. I did all those things, SNU, which was Street Narcotics Enforcement Unit, anti-crime, where you and I would go out dressed just how we are right now and look for guns all day. That's all we did was look for guns. But it worked. It was pro-policing. Okay. Then the next mayor, Bloomberg, held on to that for a while. Then the next mayor after him was this guy De Blasio. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but
Mm.
everybody hates him because he he went back to the old ways. He got rid of SNU. He got rid of anti-crime. He got rid of these pro-policing things. Everybody always cries about pro-policing until people are upset that you're stopping them. Until they're upset that you're actually doing police work. That's the part they don't like. They want the crime to stop, but they don't like the police work part. Anyway, not to go on and on about this, but it is political will, and that's where you saw the changes. And now today, the homicide rate has risen, it's doubled, okay, in the last two administrations. But again, you're going from less than 300 a year,
Mm.
okay, to 700 a year.
Mm.
Nowhere near the numbers of the 1990s,
Mm.
but it's a slow march. We got to put the brakes on this and go back to those lower numbers. I'm
It,
sorry. You forced me into a tangent there, my
well,
friend. Go ahead.
I'm gonna present an alternate theory to you for the drop in
Yes.
crime rate in New York might lead to me to stepping on some sort of political landmine.
No, please go ahead.
But there's an interesting theory called Donahue Hewitt hypothesis, and they're two economists that were given the challenge of working out what causes drop in crime. And certainly, some people think it was policing, some people think it was Giuliani, some people think it was like change in drug laws. But this drop in crime happened all over America, not just New York, which is interesting.
Yes.
And these two economists looked at data and they asked, is it because of women winning reproductive rights a generation before? And they argued that crime was due to unwantedness, and the ability to have an abortion reduced unwantedness in children. So fewer children are being born into unwanted families and therefore not growing up unwanted by their mother and then not going into a life of crime. So obviously a generation before the 90s, women were given that choice and unwantedness came down. And then you can see all on America, because obviously different levels of abortion, different level at different times, and then you saw the crime rates coming down more or less in line with the different times in which uh, abortion was legalized. So that's an interesting theory. And the reason why I bring that up is that is the same thing happening again, where unwantedness from the father is causing knife crime, where we're pushing fathers into unwanted sort of families. And that's causing a new spike in violent crime because we're having the same here. And what I'm trying to say is that trying to link or proposing a link between unwantedness and violent crime later in life.
Well, there's no doubt that I have to agree with you on the end part of that because unwantedness period ruins it for everybody. I mean, the kids that I grew up with, I was a kind of a street urchin, if you will. I ran around the streets my whole life. I was a high school dropout. I went to the worst performing high school in New York City. Okay, public school at the time, and this was all in the '80s. And at that time, abortion was legal
Mm,
in New York City. In New York, different states had different things. New York City, we had abortions as long as I've been around. As
mm.
far as I think, what was Roe versus Wade, 1970 or 73,
Yeah.
and so I was, just a small guy at that time. Um, but what was I going to say? Is that the worst, roughest kids from my neighborhood, you know, always had shit parents. It's just that, to put it bluntly, you had even if your parents were around, they were into drinking, they were into drugs, they did not take care of you, you know? I mean, luckily for me, I had a wonderful mother. The only reason I never got mixed up in drugs, as so many of my friends did, is because I couldn't do it to her.
Mm.
That makes sense to you?
Yeah, yeah.
A lot of things that I could have done that would have been really bad, I couldn't do that to my mother. I love my mother too much. Where my father, who abandoned us at 11, you know, I from 11 on was, you know, fatherless and saddened by it, hurt by it, rejected by it, whatever psychological things you want to throw in there. But I had a strong mother
Mm.
who was, really a great gal. I love my mother very much, and um, she made sure we were taken care of, fed, cleaned, clothed, etc., etc. And so for my respect for her is what kept me from going astray. But to get to your point, absolutely, if a child is not wanted in the world, okay, he's going to have a lot of problems as he grows
Mm.
up. There's no doubt about that. And in fact, on that same note, geez, I don't know. It's been years now that I saw it. Because we've been going through a lot of abortion stuff here in America. Um, but what was it that they said? It's over 50%, I believe, of pregnancies in Harlem, the neighborhood of Harlem, are ended uh, by abortion, which is
Wow.
to me is a giant number.
That's huge. Yeah.
That's huge. But then again, it becomes where many women in particular, sadly, choose abortion as birth control.
Yeah.
You know, as opposed to being responsible to begin with.
Yeah.
And I don't wanna make any listeners mad. It's not that it's accidents happen. Believe me, I understand that. Um, but when you hear of women who have had 8 abortions, 10
That's
abortions,
yeah.
that's
That's
a whole
crazy.
other psychological road we can go down. You
Yeah.
know,
No, yeah. But the question would be if those women in Harlem didn't have access to his abortions and were forced into having children as a result, a generation later, would those children have higher crime rates than
absolutely,
and that's
absolutely.
that's the same question that people are asking about the 1990s where women the opposite happened, where women that were being forced to have children now had the
I'm gonna agree with that, um, as an ingredient.
Yeah, of many things, of course.
as
All
an
right,
ingredient,
I'll
because
meet you there.
there's no simple answers to any of
Yeah,
this.
yeah. I'm not
But
gonna
as an ingredient, absolutely. But
I mean,
again, it's
yeah.
poverty, education, uh, fatherlessness, drugs. I so many times we talk about crime and how one bad apartment in a building ruins a building, two bad
Mm,
buildings on a block ruins a block. It's just that's how quickly it is, and so there's so many things that go into this problem.
there's no easy
Uh,
answers
yeah,
for sure.
it is heartbreaking. It
There's
really,
another.
really
Well,
is.
there's one more story I'll tell you about
Please.
about elephants in Africa. Another true story, and that was in Kruger National Park, which you might be aware is like a huge safari
Yes.
park, national park in Africa. They had an elephant problem where a lot of elephants have been killed by poachers, so they decided to bring some of the elephants to a sanctuary in Africa to repopulate them. And they were very successful, and they repopulated the elephants. And it became time to take the elephants back to Kruger. So they got these huge Chinook helicopters to lift the elephants up and carry them back. But the problem was that the helicopters weren't strong enough to lift the African male bull elephants, the dads. So they were like, whatever, we'll just take the women and children, the smaller elephants, the juveniles and the mothers, and we'll fly them to Kruger, and we'll just leave the males behind. It doesn't matter. Anyway, they were like, job done. Apart from 18 months later, they started to find huge, big game animals like rhinos, for example, just gored to death. And there aren't many things that would or could even kill a rhino. So the park ranger was scratching their head. So they set up secret hidden cameras to watch what happened, and they basically found marauding bands of juvenile male elephants that were going around killing rhinos for sport, for no reason other than sport. And they theorized that maybe these are the juvenile males that had been deprived of the male bull elephants that were left behind. So they're like, if we go back and get the dad elephants and bring them, will that solve the problem? And it did. They went back, got a bigger helicopter, brought the
Yes.
male bull elephants back, and they found out those male bulls played an indispensable role in socializing the young males, particularly into basically understanding musk, which is like the elephant equivalent of testosterone,
Mhm.
and the goring stopped. And I was like, what a beautiful story. And the parallel between those male bulls and knife crime, elephants and fatherlessness,
Absolutely.
gangs is just like so interesting.
Yeah. No, you have to, you have to learn, again, and it comes down to where people want to say, I don't know, put men into this tight little group and make it negative. You have to have men.
Yeah.
You have to have men to raise men. You have to have the John Waynes, so to speak, back to throw back for young men to look up to admire, to want to emulate. If not, they don't know what to emulate, and they're going to be attracted to the worst things,
Mm.
and
Well,
or simply not know. Simply not know. I mean, one thing that I did learn from my father was how not to treat women.
mm,
That might seem odd, but knowing him as long as I did, and then of course, as you become a man and you put these things together, I said, well, I'm never going to treat my wife the way my father treated my mother. You know?
good. Yeah. I mean, it's of course. I mean, you're a great example of needing both. Like, it's not just about needing dads, although of course we do. It's the mothers of obviously equally as
Oh, sure.
important.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You know what? We're gonna take a quick break right now, all right, for our sponsors, but we are gonna be right back because I'm digging this conversation and we barely got started.
Great.
Very good.
You are.
Hey, how you doing? It's me again, another nobody, Travis Myers. And today we're going to talk whiskey. I know most of you think of me as an all-American patriotic type guy, and you are right. But when it comes to whiskey and drinking whiskey, which I do, I always go for the Irish stuff. And my choice when it comes to the Irish stuff is Powers Irish Whiskey. Established back in 1791. It's a triple distilled, oak aged whiskey. Powers is simply magic. It also happens to be the #1 selling whiskey in Ireland, which has got to say something, because if it's good enough for the Irish, it's good enough for you. So the next time you raise a glass, fill it with Powers, and think of me, another nobody, Travis Myers. This is a 2024 American Eagle gold coin, which I bought along with several others last year. I'm very happy to report that its value has gone up over 40% in the first year. See, I was encouraged to buy some gold by a financial advisor friend who suggested I be more diversified with my investments. She said gold and silver was a very safe place to park some money, as well as a good hedge against inflation. So I took her advice, and all I can say is I wish I had bought more, as it's been so very, very good to us so far. Now, I purchased these gold coins from the good people over at stackingboise.com, who could not have been nicer, more knowledgeable, or more helpful. Now, I'm certainly no financial expert, but I will say from experience, if you're looking to make an investment, buy yourself some gold. And some real gold that you could hold in your hand, just like this coin you see here. And if you do, then do like I did and get with the good folks over at stackingboise.com. I'm telling you, they're good people, they took good care of me, and they'll take good care of you. Again, that's stackingboise.com. And hey, tell them Travis sent you. Hey there, true crime fans. Let me introduce you today to the Cold Case Initiative. The Cold Case Initiative is a foundation that donates money to smaller police agencies all over the country. It does this in order to offset the costs of scientific, forensic, and DNA testing with the hope of solving cold case homicides and other horrific violent crimes that otherwise would remain unsolved. Please, if you have it in your heart and a little money to spare, go to www.coldcaseinitiative.org. Again, that's www.coldcaseinitiative.org and lend a hand where it truly is needed. Be a part of solving a cold case. Every little bit helps. Know that 100% of the donations that go to the Cold Case Initiative go to agencies that are desperately in need of the help. So please, if you can, do the right thing and make a donation. Thanks, and all the best, my friends. Hey, everybody, how you doing? I am back with my new friend here, George from Tinmen, and well, we're talking about a lot of pretty depressing stuff here because, of course, it is all wrapped around male suicide, you know, and it's not only its pervasiveness but its rise and some of the reasons why. I don't know exactly where you want to go next, okay, but we've definitely talked about fatherless homes and different things, and the men growing up depressed and at a loss and not, for lack of a better word, not being men. Can I say that without insulting all men? But there definitely is a lack there. Also, what I find, and I like to get your what you think on it. I don't think that we really, as men, get the care. We're not cared for as men. Does that make sense to you? Am I wording that properly? In other words, when we seek help, and I know a lot of men who are suicidal do seek help, but it's something ridiculous. Like over 90% who seek help still commit suicide.
Well, it's the other way around. So 90% of middle-aged men who died by suicide did seek help.
I'm sorry, that's what I thought I was saying.
Simple, slightly different, yeah. But there's a study.
90% who have gone for help, and these are older men, still kill themselves regardless.
Yes, yeah. Well, that's a particular study in Manchester, and that was of middle-aged men, and it looked at men who had died by suicide, and it found 91% had sought help. So they'd been to services, they'd been to healthcare professionals, and tragically, it didn't stop them from ending their own lives. So the question that presents is men seeking help, men talking, opening up, enough to solve the problem itself? Seemingly no. And although of course it is important for anyone to talk, especially men, to share their issues of the world, it's also important not to see that as a complete solution to male suicide, because like I said, if 91% of people who died by suicide did seek help and still died, that clearly isn't enough. So it sort of asks for a new understanding of what male suicide is, because I mean, the last few years, we have been talking more about men's mental health and male suicide, thankfully. But we've just had our latest data in the UK, 2025, and we've had the worst year this century. So,
Yes.
despite having all this talk, the problem isn't getting better. If anything, it's getting worse. So, maybe it's time to ask: are we getting this right? And I've got a new approach to male suicide that doesn't see it as a primarily a mental health issue at all. Like, people seem to think suicide is some sort of chemical imbalance in a man's brain, some sort of pathology, some sort of mental health issue. But if you actually speak to suicidal men, most of them say they don't have a mental health problem at all. They'll have a variety of different issues, a lot of it around work, a lot of it around debt, a lot around physical illness. A lot of men are losing children in like custody battles. A lot of men are getting divorced. And it's not right to see them as mentally unwell. Like, as a family man yourself, it's if you were to lose your child and marriage and home in a divorce, like, I imagine your rates of suicide would go up. And
Oh,
I
absolutely.
can see why a man in that situation would consider ending his life. So it's important not to see that man as mentally unwell, but rather a man that's going through significant, very difficult, stressful life events. And in that case, using suicide is a sort of a solution based outcome, I've seen it described as. So, yeah, if you look at the associated circumstances of a man's suicide, it's debt, it's job loss, it's family breakdown, child custody battles, physical issues. Like, construction has one of the highest suicide rates anywhere in the UK. And that's because a lot of men get to maybe 50, their back gives out, they can't retrain, the debt is mounting, so they'll end their lives. A lot of men are in abusive relationships. A lot of men have experienced sort of traumatic events early in life. A lot of them are veterans. And it's not to call it a mental health issue. I think it distracts us from the structural issues they're experiencing. And
Sure.
often it's both. It's significant stressful events and mental health on top of that.
I hate this again when I say I understand it. I certainly don't want anybody making a phone call on me, but I do understand it. That I can see where it's well, what's the point? Really,
Mm,
what's the point of going on? If I'm miserable, okay, I don't have my children, I'm estranged from my children, I'm estranged from my wife, I'm divorced, my debt is out of control, I can no longer work, because the labor market is shit, you know, what am I going to do? It's a way out as opposed to a mental health situation where a couple of pills or some counseling could straighten them out. But
mm,
that's not the case with so many, many men.
mm.
I have a little story for you. I used to work back when I was in narcotics in the Bronx when I was doing the cop thing. We had this poor fellow. I mean, I could tell you a bunch of terrible stories about police officers who just had rotten lives and divorces and everything else. Divorce is very high. Suicide is very high in the police world. But this poor fella in particular, I was working narcotics at the time, and he became an undercover. So he would work for us as an undercover and go buy drugs. And he worked the midnights with us because he was divorced and he had lost custody of his children. I think he had 4 kids. And then he would go and work another job all day as an auto mechanic for cash because he had to pay the majority of his police pay in child support because he had 4 children that he had to support and an ex-wife. And the guy had no money. So literally he worked all day and all night every
Mm.
day. I mean, I say it, with a bit of humor, but there's absolutely nothing funny about it at all. If I had that life, I'd put a gun in my mouth. I can't imagine just slaving away with no life, no off time, and then being denied your kids. Your kids that you're paying for on top of that. He was a very, very nice fellow, but what a heartbreaking story it was. And I lived with him. I saw him every day at work, you know, and it
I mean,
was tragic, absolutely tragic.
I have a friend whose PhD is in male suicide research, and I mean, she's a woman, but she works directly with suicidal men, thousands of them, and she keeps saying to me, like, every time I talk to these men, I just can't help but think I'm not surprised you don't want to be here anymore. Like your life sounds really difficult,
Yes.
and they're not. It's not right to say they're mentally unwell and they can medicate their issues away. Because a man who's losing his child, for example, taking a pill or going to therapy won't bring his child back.
No, it will not.
Uh, so it's although it's important to talk, that only helps deal with the problem. It doesn't necessarily solve the problem. The problem is helping that man spend more time with his child, giving a bit more access, more quality within the divorce. That solves the problem.
Yes.
Talking is a short-term solution, which I encourage men to do, but it's not a silver bullet by any means.
I think you hit the nail right on the head there. Um, in that, there's no amount of therapy or some kind of special pill
Mm,
is not a pragmatic solution to fix your problems. It's not going to fix your problems at all. In fact, if anything, the the drugs may make your problems worse because we all know many of these antidepressants make you more suicidal.
mm.
That's another thing we can touch on possibly. And well, getting back to the therapy now thing too, and you will know better than me, and you may have some numbers, but I know every time I had to talk to and I've never been to a therapist, how could I say it, voluntarily, okay? In that whenever you had an incident, a serious incident in the police department, it was an automatic. You went and spoke to somebody because they want to make sure they get it on paper, all right?
Mm.
Which then is not therapy at all because they know it's just to cover your ass, check a box kind of thing. Then I'm a part of a thing called oh geez, I'm not going to be able to think of the name of it now. It's a 9/11 program at Mount Sinai Hospital, where you go once a year and they do all of they test your blood work and everything for the Twin Towers 9/11 incident. And part of that is you talk to a counselor. But every time I talk to a counselor, I have some like 25-year-old girl who's never done anything in her life, and I'm not trying to beat up on these young women, but how about if I talk to somebody with a man with the same experiences as me? I could definitely see. I don't feel that I need therapy, but I could definitely see how a group, one of those therapy groups, would be much more therapeutic. You
Yeah,
know, and or a counselor who is a 60-year-old man, 70-year-old man who's had a life. You know, to tell me rather than a 25-year-old woman. I'm
well, we
sorry,
have
go
this.
ahead.
We have these things in the UK called men's sheds. I don't know if they've arrived in America yet, but they're absolutely incredible. Men's Sheds is a charity that opens up, as I'm sure you can imagine, sheds with men in them. And they have one in every single city, every single town in the country. And the idea is that a man probably of your age will go there and they'll work with other men to sort of build things, fix things, often toys for local families. So a family will come with something that needs fixing and the men will fix it. And it's basically sort of group therapy pretend as workshop sort of stuff. And
Yes.
those are the things that men seem to be drawn to, not just men's sheds, but men's walking groups, men's talking groups, sort of different. There's allotments that have opened up. There's called social prescription charities. So instead of getting like a medical prescription, like a pill, you go to a group, like a men's sheds. So those are things that are really, really powerful, particularly for older men who are lonely, to go to a shed and hang out with other men with a similar lived experience and spend the day carving wood or fixing things, getting that sense of purpose back whilst doing something good for your local neighborhood and community. It's like a win-win. And they're very popular in the UK because a lot of, like you're right, a lot of men don't want to go and have traditional therapy where you do go into a clinical environment and you are often speaking to a woman who doesn't necessarily know what a man's lived experience is any more than I know what a woman's lived experience is. And a bit like teachers, I mean, 80% of therapists are women, so it's quite hard to find a male therapist anyway.
Yes.
And more broadly, the psychological industry does seem to be run by women for women, and these interventions are just more suitable for them. And it's not like they're doing it intentionally. And it's a bit like in the male dominated industries, they're more suited to men. And the opposite seems to be true for psychology. So I'm glad to see these new social prescription charities opening up. And I think they already have arrived to America, but they really are quite literally life saving.
I
And
can imagine so. I can relate it a lot to, of course, my time owning bars and pubs and drinking culture in New York as a
mm,
whole. is the camaraderie that comes from the corner pub. Now, granted, you have the problems of alcohol that are attached to that. However, there is that camaraderie. The old joke of the bartender being the psychiatrist, and you're basically on the couch when you're on the other side. But you have all those other people to talk to who can understand your problems and relate to your problems. And conversely, like I have two different diners that I have breakfast in most every morning. And in these diners, it is what we call a coffee clutch. There's always the same 8 or 10 guys in there. They meet up, they have coffee in the morning, you know, and they bullshit about their lives for an hour or two, and then they get on with the rest of their day. But that, to these men, that is therapy.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
diner in the morning, the diner in the morning or the pub in the afternoon, okay? Because these are not late night guys. They're not hanging out till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. This is not Party Central. It's the only people that they have. Many of them are widowed or divorced or whatever, and they live alone, but they come out and they get together with everybody. And to speak to them, they don't appear to have many mental problems. And to be honest, I can't think of any of the guys from the pubs and or that I know from the diners who have ever been suicidal, you
Mm,
know, because they can get it out every day
mm.
with with peers, with people that understand, you
There's
know?
no, I think there's loads of really interesting little hobbies that men have like that are often shamed. I know there's one like some men get together and they make steam engines. There's another
Yes,
group of
yes.
men that get together and they reenact like Roman battles.
Yeah, they do the same thing here. They do Revolutionary Wars, do what is the other thing? Civil War reenactments. We have
Yeah.
my son actually does it. He does a big thing where they do, these paintball games, which I've never done one, but they sound like, it's very physical, it's very exciting. But there's a giant one that they do, which is I think it's D-Day that they do, a reenactment.
Wow.
But it's something ridiculous, like 4,000 people show up for this thing, you know, and they all battle it out for 2 days, and it's what they look forward to all year. All these yeah, young men, old men, everybody gets together. Women go too, but very few. It's predominantly men that go and do this stuff, and it's a very therapeutic
Therapeutic.
thing,
Yeah.
you know.
And it's annoying because people do these groups and then someone online will say, oh, men would rather enact D-Day than go to therapy. And it's like, you got that wrong because that is therapy. That is what men consider therapy. Going on a walk, taking your dogs out, going to a workshop, enacting Roman battles is therapy to a lot of these men. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's one charity, I went to their fundraiser last year called Strong Men, and it's a group for men who have been bereaved, often fathers who have lost children, and they walk up mountains.
Yeah,
And the amount of amazing work they do is just, I can't even describe it to you. I met one guy called Chunk who was just this big, burly, hyper masculine man who lost his child, and he didn't tell anyone about any of it. Never opened up once, and he went on like one walk. And by the time he got to the top of the mountain, he was bawling his eyes out. And then a few years later, he runs the walks, he leads the walks, he's like the organizer. And that's because of these things like the walking, talking groups and stuff like that. So it's easy to laugh at them at the D-Day landings and the Roman battles and the steam engines, but ultimately this is how men bond often, and there's nothing wrong with that.
absolutely, it's a thing to do. It is. I don't know what if I'm using the right word, but it is somewhat creative. You have to be a part of it. You have to have the equipment. You have to have the stuff. You quite often know the history, so hopefully you're doing a little reading and educating yourself, et cetera, et cetera. It's something to be into. And then when you get into the group, like the steam engines, I don't know if you're talking about the big trains, but a lot of times they have the little trains
Yeah, yeah,
too. And they
both.
have clubs. They have clubs where they go and it can be quite expensive. I've seen these little trains, these little toy trains that sell for thousands of dollars. But for the guys that are into it, they know everything about trains and they love them. And they have, again, a camaraderie with everybody else that's into it, you know? And so I can definitely, there was a very good English television show that I liked. Um, Crap, I can't think of the name of it, but they were the metal detectorists.
Yes.
You remember that?
Yeah, yeah, I love that.
The thing about it was the metal detecting thing was really a silly side note to the fact that they had relationships
Mm. Yeah,
and
yeah.
they were able not to be lonely because they
Yeah,
all got together. It was a
and-
sweet little show, if you
yeah,
know
and
what I'm talking about.
a bunch of older men going into the middle of a field looking for Roman coins. How is that not therapeutic? If they leave that feeling better and feeling happier, then that is therapy. It's not all about going into a clinical environment and sitting down and talking one to one.
Correct.
Often men prefer group therapy and they prefer to be side shoulder to shoulder rather than face to face.
Yes.
And it's really nice to see these groups being set up by men for men.
Well, that's one thing that we I don't want to say have because it's not a formal thing, but and I'm sure it happens with many things, but maybe should happen more in the construction industry and things like that. In the police world, it does, and it's quite often looked down upon. There's a subculture that's formed, okay, because those of us that do this particular job only are the only ones who understand other people that do this particular job because it is such a multifaceted job. Like I had, and I don't know if it's true or not, but I had read one time that when it comes to policing, that an average person, an average man, will have, 4 to 8 traumatic experiences in his life, where a police officer will have as many as 900
Yeah, that's not
because
surprising.
it's the nature of the beast. A soldier, you can't you know uh, uh, take a soldier's life and equate it to a guy who's went to college and became an accountant. It's two totally different worlds. Not that the accountant doesn't have his own set of problems, but only a soldier can understand what a soldier goes through.
Mm.
You see, and so you end up with these subcultures, you know, and I think that a subculture can be helpful and beneficial. All right. Where a man who is lost, again, possibly the accountant, where he works with, a handful of people at the office who have completely different interests than he does, you know, and now he's divorced and now he's paying alimony and now he's, even if he can see his kids, it's only on the weekends or every other weekend. So you get your kids 4 days a month. How god awful is that?
Mm.
And who's going to understand this poor guy?
And
Who's he going to talk to? You
totally.
know?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I get contacted by police officers quite often, and a lot of them are trying to set up men's networks within their police force for these to help these men, and a lot of them are really struggling because although there are networks for police women, there is nothing for police men, despite 90% of police officers being men. And I think it's because they're quite nervous to set up men's networks because it's politically
Something I've
unpopular.
seen in our government. I'm have to say it's exactly the same in the UK because again we mirror each other quite a bit. What was it? I don't know. I could be wrong with the numbers. You may know because obviously you follow America quite a bit. But there's something like 12 to 18 federal, not state, because every state has their own thing too. Federal agencies wrapped around women and women's health and women's well-being and women's safety.
Mm.
Zero for men,
Mm.
not one for men.
Mm.
That
Yeah,
is titled men. Do you
yeah.
understand what I'm saying?
Well, I think certainly for women's health, there are 10 federal offices for women, just women's health on its own. There's other things like the Women's Bureau for workplace stuff, but just for health, there's 10, none for men. And like we started the conversation, like men's health is behind women's in every single metric you can imagine in America, and there's not one office for them. And these women's offices, I think they're great, but there has to be something for men.
Oh no, let's both, even though I don't think we should have to, but let's make sure, even though we're close to an hour into this already, give the disclaimer. We don't want less for women. Means, need all the help they can get. Everybody needs all the help they can get, but it seems to me, and the numbers show it, and your work shows it. Your work definitely shows it that men are completely ignored.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Well,
Right?
many areas.
Yeah.
I mean, especially in workplace as well. You mentioned 9/11 and first responders. I always think it's amazing where 344 firefighters in New York lost their lives on that day. So, of those 344 firefighters who died, how many of those do you think are men?
I would say all of them.
Yeah. Literally all of them, not a single female, and that's such a testament to the bravery of men and the sacrifice of men. And I'm sure being a firefighter has a huge amount of traumatic events, a lot like being a police officer,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
there needs to be more done for them as well. And obviously, even more firefighters must have died as a result of the various different health impacts it had. But it always shocked me that's 100%, not 99%, or all of them, and that's never talked about.
No, it's not. It's
But
not.
it's not even just firefighting, but men. I mean, it's a bit of a tangent, but men perform the majority of all bystander rescues, even if it's not their job. It's normally men that are kicking down the door of the burning building or dragging you out or trying to subdue the assailant. It's often the man with the knife or the gun, but it's also men on the opposite side trying to stop them. So,
Well, it is. It is part of, and I'm not even going to say wrongly. And again, I don't know if I'm sounding like a dinosaur now, because I do still myself, and maybe I'm being old-fashioned. I am a women and children first kind of guy. That's in my DNA. That's in me. I think that's. And speaking of DNA, I think it's in all of us, men, to want to be the provider, be the protector, be the. I've done it before I was ever a police officer and I was a young kid in the street. My brother and I, many times, and friends, you know, of mine stood up against, purse snatchers, robberies. It was eh, we gave a guy a beating one time because he was nakedly trying to sexually harass a woman on the street. All right. And we grabbed him and she ran off safe because two teenage boys stood up to this guy, you know? Um, and today people would look, I really believe today people would look at us as the aggressors as opposed to the heroes. Now, the victim would never look to us that way. The victim is always going to be happy that somebody stood up. But the media, okay, well, we had it here. We had that poor kid. I'm not going to be able to think of his name now, who uh, who choked a guy out on the subway. Um, I want to say 2 or 3 years ago now, but it turned out that he was a young white Marine, and him and two other black fellas grabbed the crazy black guy who was threatening to kill everybody on the subway. They all went down together.
mm,
The white guy ended up being arrested and going through the system. He ended up being exonerated, but he had to go through, 2 years of hell before it happened for doing the right thing
mm.
and standing up for people that he did not know. And that's what people don't understand. When people do, be it a police officer or a good Samaritan, you're standing up for people you don't even know because it's hard to do so, you know?
It's
And then
interesting.
you're demonized for it.
It's an interesting bias that occurs there, where we often gender the people that do harm, like a gunman or a knife man. Obviously, man's in there, but when you said good Samaritan there or police officer there, you're taking away the gender. So
Hmm.
it's interesting how you don't gender the good things men do as male heroism, but you will gender the bad knife man, con man, henchman, gunman, blah blah blah.
I love that you bring that up because there's another generational thing. Okay. And when I say generation, I'm not trying to beat up on millennials or Zoomers at all, but it is a thing where there's been a constant, this is a little bit off topic, but it's apropos, where there's been a constant attempt to change our language over the last 25, 30 years or more. We don't say policeman or fireman anymore. It's police officer and firefighter. I'm doing it myself because it is our current vernacular,
Mm.
right? Just like you
Yeah,
said,
yeah,
you know, when I grew up, I wanted to be a policeman. I wanted to be a fireman,
yeah.
you know, but we don't say fireman. We say firefighter.
I mean, I don't mind it.
I don't mind it. I don't mind it at all. Okay. But it's just a funny thing how you see, again, a dinosaur like myself has been trained now to use the new words, you know?
Yeah, but we do gender the bad things men do. We will say violence against
Absolutely.
women. We won't say domestic violence. We'll say violence against women.
Uh-huh.
Whereas a third of domestic violence victims are men, but we will erase them by calling it violence against women. So my point is that it's lopsided. And
Correct.
I mean, there's an interesting. I don't know if you know the Carnegie Awards. They're quite interesting. They've been going for I think over 100 years, maybe 120 years. to get a Carnegie Award, you have to have risked or even sadly lost your life to help a stranger. So it has to be someone that's basically dived into the flood or ran into the burning building. And they give them out every single year. They have done for 100 years, 10,000 awards given out. I think 90% have gone to men.
Yes.
90%. That's not a coincidence. So I'm not trying to deny that men do great harm. Most murderers are men, of course, but they also
Yes.
do a huge amount of good. So we need to talk about both sides of that. I think
Yeah.
if we're going to talk about, like we talked earlier about showing more kindness, more awareness of men, it's nothing wrong with talking about harm they do, but I think we need to also talk about the good things they do.
Yeah. I'd like to touch. We can go on for hours and hours. I love talking to you. I really do.
Yeah,
And I
likewise.
really, again, love the work that you do. Before we say goodbye, the last topic, unless, of course, we go off on some tangents, which are absolutely no time limit here, my friend, so we can talk as much as we want. But I really, really want to touch on loneliness.
Yeah.
Okay? We talked a little bit about it before, but loneliness is a tremendous problem with men, you know, and especially the older men who are killing themselves at an alarming rate. Um, what are your general outlooks on that?
Uh, yeah, it's a massive issue. One that's often mocked by society. I often get sent stories of people laughing or rolling their eyes or sneering at the concept of male loneliness. And they'll be like, they're not lonely, they're just losers. They need to sort their life out, blah, blah, blah. And it's just, that is horrendous for you to say that. But it is a serious issue. I have a friend I mentioned called Susie, who's a male suicide researcher, and she basically wanted to lay down an agenda for male suicide.
Is this Dr. Susie? I've listened to her or read
Oh,
something once before. I really like her. I really, really
I'll
do.
introduce you.
Please.
I'm sure she'll come on your podcast. She's the real expert. I'm always just regurgitating her knowledge, and I'm going to do that now.
I I mean, quite some time ago, I don't know what it was. I wish I could remember, but I listened to her or read something of hers once, and she was spot on, man. She really knew. She was really hip to what was going on. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
yeah. Well, she because there's no research being done in the UK at least around male suicide. She wanted to set out an agenda for male suicide research to work out what are the big important questions we need to answer. And to work that out, she basically asked hundreds of lived experience experts, meaning men who are suicidal, bereaved families. And then she asked dozens of clinical experts, so that the doctors, the professors, the academics from dozens of countries, brought it all together. And she found the number one priority was male loneliness. And 98% of people she asked said it's very important or essential to investigate male loneliness. So if suicide is the biggest risk to a man's life, and if loneliness is the most important associated factor, I would say it's an extremely important thing to talk about. Certainly not something to laugh at or make fun of, as I often see on social media. So it's a massive problem. Obviously, it impacts women as well, but I think there's something unique about male loneliness, particularly in older men. So it's something that sadly we don't know enough about. Thanks to the amazing work by Susie and others, we know a little bit more, but it's it literally kills, and it doesn't just end life by suicide. It increases all sorts of health problems. Like it has a real tangible negative impact on your health, being lonely, and it
There's
destroys lives.
there's a point I'd like to make about that too, is that something that people quite often don't understand or believe, it doesn't click to them, is that even people who are married and have families
Mhm.
can be very, very lonely.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay. It does not mean that you're completely alone in life, although when you're alone in life, it's a very sad thing. But there are many people who suffer from loneliness who do have families. It's just that they're so locked within themselves or whatever problems that they have, you know. They're possibly ridiculed by their wives and or by their children or other relatives, when they try to they don't feel that they can talk about whatever it is that they need to talk about, and they just become turtles within a shell, you know.
yeah.
Suck themselves in and are incredibly lonely. I'm
I
sorry, go
mean,
ahead.
yeah, you could be in a room full of people and still be lonely. It's not about physically being near people. It's about feeling connected and understood and cared for. And there's a lot of men that don't feel any of those things. I think a lot of it, I think, it's generational. I think because a lot of older men spent their whole lives working, like you mentioned your friend, like every single minute of their day, they're working, working, working. That takes them to 60, 65. They retire, and all of their connections, their colleagues, sort of disappear, and they're left to about that purpose. Often with a family they haven't spent enough time with because they were working so much,
Sure.
and all of their friends and everything about who they were, their whole identity has been suddenly left behind.
Mhm.
And I see that in my parents. Like my mum, who's now retired, she's got so many friends because she spent the first 2 years of my life raising us, and
Mhm.
now she has loads of friends from loads of mothers basically. And my dad never had that when he retired.
Well, I'm sure even, everybody can have an understanding to that, uh, because a young man like yourself already, you've known how many people you were tight with in, we call it high school. I don't know what you would call it where you are, that you went to your early years,
Mhm.
whatever it is, grade 10 or 12, whatever it is, with, you never see him again.
Mm.
Maybe you go to university, okay, but once college is over, you make the greatest friends in your lives. You never see them again. I mean, I had, friends from the military I stayed in touch with for a couple of years later, maybe 6 years later, maybe eight. Then you never see them again. My friends from the police department. I have people that I'll text on occasion and get a phone call, but it's not like I'm seeing them on a daily basis anymore, even though we went through so many things together,
Mm.
you know? And we had such a tight, tight bond at that time. And again, same with the pubs that I've owned or construction jobs. I mean, guys that you called brother, you just loved each other so much. And bang, you leave that job, you never see him again.
Mm.
It's just the way it is. It doesn't make anybody wrong. It's just the way it is. And now I can see, certainly, especially if you've moved out of your town or your city, or people are starting to die on you. And now, who's left? Who's left that understands you? That
I've,
understands George. Who are you going to talk to now? It's a very
yeah,
scary place to be.
quite a somber point.
Yeah,
But I would encourage the men in that position who have left work behind or moved cities to try to find new things to work, like we talked earlier, the hiking groups, the men's sheds,
absolutely.
dog walking societies, like workshops, bushcraft groups are quite popular. There's loads of things like sports, hobbies. Like a lot of men spend their lives working, and of course that's where their sense of purpose is, but it doesn't have to stay that way. Like there's loads of
Yes.
places. My mum's joined a quilting society now, and that's where she's making her friends. So
Yeah.
there's definitely hope, and there's definitely places to go. It's not all bad.
Yeah. You know what? I think we had quite a good conversation here. What I would like to repeat before we go, though, are those numbers. The last ones that we just did with uh, the amount of men who commit suicide and how many of them do it because they're lonely. Those stats that you just cited 2 minutes ago.
Well, I mean, it's more so loneliness being seen as a really essential part of male suicide by almost everybody that is suicidal or who's an expert. And there's an interesting, I know you talked about language earlier, about being part of the generation where you don't like your language corrected. One of the ways in which people are correcting language, I actually do think is helpful, is committed suicide is a term that people are leaving behind a little bit now, because then you'll appreciate it. That goes back to when it was a crime to commit suicide, and it's interesting how it used to be a crime as well. Like that's what a horrendous thing to do to someone or a family. But loneliness is absolutely a massive problem. It's difficult to link it so tangibly to suicide, but it's certainly one of the most, if not the most important associated factor with male suicide, which is quite literally the biggest risk to my life and probably your life. So there's no way to diminish its importance. It's really, really important. It's one of those things where the solution to loneliness is in many ways in our hands, where you and I and each of us are, as Susie would say, Dr. Bennett would say, we are all the antidote to each other's pain. And there's nothing stopping you after this podcast texting a friend or calling a friend or getting that beer in at the pub. And that is the solution to loneliness. It's not necessarily about more government funding or more research. It's just about a little bit of effort on everyone's behalf to reach out and reconnect, especially in this digital age where we don't spend hardly any time with each other.
Yeah.
So one of the pieces of advice I'll leave you with is that whenever you think about a person during your day, doesn't matter who it is, just send them a text. Just send them a text and be like, Travis, I thought of you. I thought about that podcast we did 6 months ago. I thought I'd send a text, say, how you doing?
It's that simple.
If we all did that, we'd have a massive impact.
It really is that simple. George, thank you so very, very much, my friend.
Pleasure.
It's really, really nice meeting you in person and getting to chat for a little while.
Yeah. It's rare.
I really hope you come back sometime because, I got a mile of stuff on other topics I'd love to ask.
Well, it's a pleasure. It's very rare to speak to someone as interesting and as experienced as yourself. So I'm sure there's many things we could keep talking about. And yeah, we'll absolutely have to do another episode. Can't wait. Thank you.
All the best, my friend.
Bye.
All right. George of the Tinmen, everyone. Please check him out on his Instagram @TheTinmen, where he delivers so much information about male suicide prevention. And also, do like George said and reach out to anyone you know that may be feeling all alone in the world. It's just a good thing to do. It'll make them feel better, and I'm sure it will make you feel good as well. Now, until next time, my friends, hit that like button. Please hit that subscribe button, and we'll do this all again next week. All the best, my friends. Hey, how you doing? Another nobody here, Travis Myers. This one's going out in particular to all my drinking friends out there, because I got a new favorite thing, and it's called Shanky's Whip, and it is magical. It's Irish whiskey mixed with a little caramel, a little cream, a little vanilla, and it's heavenly. What more can I say? I suggest you pick up a bottle. You can have it as a shot with a cold beer, like I like. On the rocks, it's great. Mix it with a little cola. I promise you, you're going to love this stuff. Next time you raise a glass, think of me, another nobody, Travis Myers. Hey, do the right thing. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any more of my nonsense. All the best, my friends.
Buy our books!
Listen up. This one's important. I'd like to try to encourage you, please, to give to the Stephen Siller Foundation, Tunnel to Towers, at T2T.org. That's letter T, number 2, letter T.org. Do good for those who've done good for you.